A prediction is a forecast about a future event, thing, or person. It can also be called a prognosis, even a prophecy. Sometimes even the wildest predictions that seemed unbelievable at the time can actually come true, making the people who made these predictions seem to be visionary geniuses. I'm Jake the Voice Parr, and these are 10 amazing predictions that actually turned out to be true. The Serbian-American inventor Nikola Tesla was a scientific genius. Not only did Tesla invent an electric current that was far safer than the electric current invented by Thomas Edison that we still use today, he was also a renowned futurist. He was obsessed with wireless applications, including wireless electricity and lighting. He predicted cell phones 60 years before they were invented and also predicted Wi-Fi technology an even more astounding 90 years before it became a part of our lives. Nikola Tesla is an example of a mind that was too advanced for the century he found himself in. John Elthorif Watkins was a curator at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. when he wrote a most interesting article in 1900 that was titled "What May Happen in the Next 100 Years." Some of his predictions were astounding for a man of his time. In the article, he envisioned everything from satellite television to the internet, not to mention digital photography and even ready-cooked meals. Watkins even mentioned how, quote, "wireless telephone and telegraph circuits will span the world." How a simple man could predict so much ahead of its time is indeed amazing, especially because he was able to accurately envision a realistic future society. Another prediction of the internet decades before it was invented came from a very unlikely source. This time it was the English novelist E.M. Forster, famous for elegant books about the class system such as Howards End, Where Angels Fear to Tread, and A Passage to India. Forster wrote a most unlikely sci-fi story in 1909 titled The Machine Stops, in which he describes a woman being in a room bathed by light in front of a machine full of switches in which she could communicate with the entire world, even though she is not physically connected to anything. This of course sounds a lot like computers and the internet of today, albeit expressed through archaic terms and language. Morgan Robertson was an author who wrote a short story in 1898 about a gigantic ship that was considered unsinkable and yet would sink with great loss of life on board after hitting an iceberg. That's of course exactly what happened in the famous sinking of the Titanic, which would shock the world 14 years later in 1912. The ship in Robertson's novel sank in the frigid waters of the North Atlantic near Newfoundland in the month of April, as precisely did to the Titanic. Most eerie of all was the name of the doomed ship in Robertson's story. The ship was called the Titan. Speaking of Titanic things, one of the giants of American literature is undoubtedly Mark Twain. He was the author famous for such legendary characters as Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. He was also well known for his sharp and dry wit and observations about life and the human condition. Another thing Twain can be given credit for is knowing a visionary mind when he saw one. Mark Twain was friends with his contemporary Nikola Tesla, and there even exists a photograph of Twain in Tesla's technology. However, predicting Tesla's success was not the only thing Twain got right. Twain was born in 1835, a year in which Halley's Comet appeared in the night sky, and he predicted he would die when it next came round in 1909. He did indeed die that year, just one day after the comet returned to orbit the Earth. Ward Hill Layman was a good friend and confidant of President Abraham Lincoln. In a biography that Layman wrote after Lincoln's assassination, he recalled a vivid nightmare that Lincoln had shared with him. Lincoln recounted how, in the dream, he walked into the East Room of the White House and saw a dead body lying in state and surrounded by crying people. Lincoln would be told in the dream that it was he who had been assassinated. Lincoln had this disturbing dream just 3 days before his assassination by John Wilkes Booth at the Ford Theater in Washington, D.C. The First World War was known as the Great War and the War to End All Wars. The peace treaty, known as the Treaty of Versailles, that officially ended the war, demanded very high reparation payments by the war's biggest loser, Germany. Some thought the treaty was too harsh on Germany. Marshal Ferdinand Foch of France was one of these people and was critical of the treaty when it was signed in 1919 and was famously quoted as saying, "This is not peace, this is an armistice for 20 years. The Second World War would break out in 1939, exactly 20 years later. Jonathan Swift was a remarkable Irish writer, satirist, poet, and wit. He is often quoted for his famous line, "May you live all the days of your life." Swift's most famous work was Gulliver's Tales, an epic satire on human nature. In the book chronicling Gulliver's adventures and travels, Swift made the assertion that Mars has 2 moons. No one could have known that in 1726, when the book was published, since it would be another 142 years before it was confirmed that Mars did indeed have 2 moons. Edgar Cayce was a famous American mystic and psychic, as criticized for being a quack, as he was revered for being a man of vision and even the inspiration for the New Age movement. What cannot be disputed is that some of his predictions were eerily accurate. Perhaps his most confounding one was that when the Earth's magnetic poles shifted between 2000 and 2001, which Cayce had correctly predicted to the exact decade back in 1936. Cayce had also correctly predicted the start and finish dates of both the First and Second World Wars. One cannot simply make a list like this without including the most famous future prophet of them all. Yes, Nostradamus. The 16th century physician is world-renowned for the huge amount of complex prophecies that he made during his lifetime. Many have debunked his predictions over the years, but some believe he made accurate predictions about events such as the Great London Fire of 1666, French leaders such as Napoleon Bonaparte and Charles de Gaulle, and the hellish rise of Hitler. For more top lists just like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out our other top lists. Thank you very much for watching, and thanks for learning.